We are very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Charles Moure. Charles Moure is a Seattle attorney with Harris and Moure, and he is representing the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. Charles, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Oh, you're welcome.
So start out, tell us how is it that you ended up being able to represent the Sea Shepherds?
Well, a few years back, approximately 4 years ago, Sea Shepherd was involved in an event down in the Southern Oceans, a pretty horrific event. One of their vessels, the Audi Gill, was encountered by a security vessel called the Shahnamar II, owned and operated by a whaling outfit out of Japan called ICR. The Shahnamar II took an extreme turn and collided with and destroyed a Sea Shepherd vessel, the Audi Gill. And we started working at that time with Sea Shepherd to assist them in getting compensation from the whalers to compensate them for the loss of that vessel. And we actually are continuing to still work on that case. It's not resolved, but there's continuing litigation on attempting to get ICR to compensate the Sea Shepherd for the loss of that vessel.
So, and that vessel what was that vessel, the Audi Gill? What was it doing? Was it tracking them? Was it?
Yes, good question. So, Sea Shepherd is their main mission is to preserve marine wildlife. Their founder, Captain Paul Watson, started the organization over 30 years ago. It's based out of Friday Harbor, Washington. Currently, and at that time, the fleet was of vessels was comprised of 3 vessels: the Bob Barker, the Steve Irwin, which is the vessel that Paul is mainly on, and the Audi Gill. The vessels are used by Sea Shepherd to do direct action on the high sea, and Sea Shepherd works extremely hard to work with their volunteers and the people that work at Sea Shepherd to develop techniques that are nonviolent, that will not damage whaling vessels and will not harm whalers. And they have a 100% clean record on that. No injuries to any whalers, sailors that are working on these fleets. But the techniques they've developed, though, have been very successful in interfering with, blocking, and stopping whaling in the Southern Oceans. The main idea is, and the whaling fleet is comprised of security vessels, harpoon vessels, which are the hunting vessels, and a very large factory ship, the Nishimaru. Sea Shepherd's techniques are the main technique is to take one of the larger vessels, the Steve Irwin or the Bob Barker, and place it behind the slipway of the Nishimaru. The Nishimaru being a large factory whaling ship, when the harpoon vessel kills the whale using, and it's quite horrific. This has been filmed by Sea Shepherd, unfortunately. They had to witness one of these killings. They used exploding tipped harpoons. They basically have a grenade in the tip of it. The harpoon goes into the whale and it explodes. Whales, as you can imagine, they're gigantic animals. They're hard to kill. And so when a grenade goes off in their skull and their brain and in their back, it does kill them. Then the whale is transferred from the hunting vessel to the factory ship. And it's a complicated maneuver. It's at sea. They're large animals, and they need to, because of the way they need to get the whale on the ship within a certain period of time. I think it's maybe 10 to 15 hours, might even be less, before the meat spoils. Sea Shepherd's technique is completely nonviolent. All they want to do is place either the Bob Barker or the Steve Irwin behind the slipway of the Nishimaru. That way, the harpooning ship, the hunting vessel, cannot transfer the whale to the factory ship, so it can be slaughtered. If that process is interfered, then it severely disrupts. Severely disrupts the whaling, and it essentially stops. The whalers will at that point stop whaling. The Oddie Gill was a trimaran, carbon fiber trimaran, high speed. It was first called the Earth Racer and set a world record, which still stands, of going around the world with a power vessel. It became part of the Sea Shepherd campaign to help find the fleet. The whaling fleet is in the Southern Oceans. The Southern Oceans, as you can see in your map over there, is a very big place. Whaling is done in certain areas, but it's a huge area. And one of the if you've seen Whale Wars, or if anybody in your audience has seen Whale Wars, you know, and that's a TV show that's on Animal Planet that's documented over the years, the seasons of Sea Shepherd going to the Southern Oceans to stop this whaling. One of the big things they have to do down there, the people at Sea Shepherd, is find the fleet. And the Oddie Gill, being a high-speed trimaran, that was one of its purposes, to help find the fleet. Because it could operate at speed 2, it was used to help interfere with the whaling vessels, the security vessels. As Sea Shepherd has added more boats to the fleet, the security vessels for the whalers have become more aggressive. They've used very aggressive navigational techniques. They use these extremely ear-piercing sound devices, LRAD, I think they're called LRADs, that are extremely damaging. I mean, they can destroy your eardrums. It's basically a military item. They use loud shock grenades, the bang grenades that set off a loud noise, high-pressured water cannons. They use prop fowlers. They drag ropes to foul the props. The Oddie Gill was to be used to circle these security vessels to try and distract them, so the Steve Irwin and the Bob Barker could carry out the mission of blocking the slipway. During one of those events, the Oddie Gill was actually waiting to be refueled, and at that time, one of the security vessels, the Shawnamara 2, bore down on the Oddie Gill and essentially destroyed it. Amazingly, no loss of life, and only one fairly minor injury to an Oddie Gill crew member, but the loss of the vessel. And really very lucky that nobody was killed, frankly. All at the fault, very much the party to blame were the whalers. It was an extremely aggressive move on their part. But when that incident occurred, we started working with Sea Shepherd, and since that time, there have been other legal matters that we've handled for them. Really enjoyed working with them. Amazing people. I love their passion. Very much believe in their mission. And it's been a real honor and a joy to represent them in court, be with them, and be able to say that they're a client of mine and my firm. Yeah.
So Japan has been the focus of that case and other cases. And in
Yes.
addition to Japan, there's Iceland and Norway are the other two major countries that slaughter whales.
Iceland and Norway continue to whale. Their programs are not nearly as big, is my understanding. I have not been involved in any cases involving either of those countries. Their programs, though, I believe, are a little bit different. The entity that was operating out of Japan, ICR, was doing it pursuant to there's a moratorium on whaling by the International Whaling Commission, which is a group of countries that have agreed to be a part of this commission to help preserve the whale species in this planet. It was actually set up initially to regulate whaling, commercial whaling, but they realized at some point that they needed to end whaling because they were essentially just being slaughtered to the point where they were all going to go extinct. And so the International Whaling Commission put in a moratorium where they just said no more whaling, period, with certain minor exceptions. One of them was for scientific purposes. Japan had a large whaling fleet that was going down to the southern oceans, killing thousands of whales a year. The Japanese entity ICR, when the moratorium came out, the Japanese government, Department of Fisheries, said, okay, well, we're going to start issuing permits now, and we're going to allow you, the whaling entity in Japan, to kill up to 1,000 whales a year for scientific purposes, which no scientific program had ever done that much lethal research, ever. Extremely controversial when they did it, and continued to be, it's continued to be controversial. Norway and Iceland, though, never did that. They never set up a program to basically get around the moratorium by saying they're whaling for scientific purposes. They've just ignored the moratorium, and have continued to whale and still whale today. You can buy whale meat at the grocery store in Norway, just like in Japan. So Norway's had coastal whaling forever, and they do it on a much smaller scale, but it's still wrong. And what will happen there? They're in the EU. It'll be interesting to see whether they continue to do it, but they certainly show no signs of stopping at this point.
But just last week, the UN, through the International Court of Justice,
correct,
made a very profound ruling.
Yes. So Australia and New Zealand, and I believe it was back in 2010, brought an action in the International Court of Justice, which is the court of the UN, where countries can go to bring grievances, complaints if they view there's been a violation of a treaty or other violations of their sovereignty, etc. It sits in The Hague, in the Netherlands, and Japan, and then New Zealand intervened, brought this action against Japan to stop whaling in the southern oceans. Australia set up a whale sanctuary off of Antarctica to protect whales that they viewed were their whales, well, that they had a right to protect them, partly because a lot of these whales breed in Australian waters off the coast of Australia. Then they migrate in the summertime, summer in the southern hemisphere, which is our winter, to feed. And so Australia and New Zealand brought this action against Japan, seeking a court order to stop Japan from whaling in their whale sanctuary. And the basis of the action was that Japan was not really doing this whaling for scientific purposes. The whaling was being conducted simply for food. They were just continuing their hunt to slaughter whales, to sell the whales in the markets in Japan for food consumption. And that meat is I mean, Nishimura is not a scientific ship. It's a slaughterhouse. The meat is butchered. The whale is butchered. The meat is packed, and the meat is if they can sell it, and that's becoming more and more difficult in Japan. The meat is sold in Japanese markets. You can go to a grocery store in Japan, and they have whale meat for sale right there in the meat market. So the court just ruled last week. Actually, this week it ruled. It was Sunday night our time, and I believe it was Monday in Europe. And the court ruled that that ICR was not whaling. That Japan was not issuing these permits for ICR to whale for scientific purposes. The ruling is, you can find it on the internet if you Google International Court of Justice. It's actually quite interesting to read. It's not a lengthy opinion. The main body of the opinion is not that long, but it's very well reasoned, very well written. It simply says that, and the trial went on. Actually, the whole trial is recorded. It's on. You can listen to it on the internet. It simply says that they just did not believe Japan. They didn't believe the Japanese witnesses, the experts, that said that they needed to kill up to 850 whales a year for scientific purposes. They just, they didn't carry the day on that. And that Australia and New Zealand's expert witnesses, scientists, were able to convince the judges, which I think is the right decision, at least in my opinion, that this whaling was not for scientific purposes. It was simply a harvest for food, and that because of that, they were violating the moratorium. But what the International Court of Justice did, that was something we did not expect. I mean, we were hoping for this ruling that it was not for scientific purposes. What we weren't sure what they were going to do was what they were going to say to as a penalty for doing that. And they went farther than we thought they were going to. The court said that all current permits should be revoked. So revocation of all permits. And that no more permits should be issued until they somehow change the program or just shut it down. And just this week on Wednesday, Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Abe, issued a press statement saying that Japan will honor the ruling and will revoke all permits for whaling in the Southern Ocean by the Japanese whaling fleet, and will not issue any more permits for next year, and that next year's hunt is now terminated. So they will not go down to the Southern Oceans next year to hunt whales, and that's the first time in over 30 years that there will be no whaling in the Southern Oceans by, I believe, any nation at this point, which is really quite a victory for the environmental movement, for Sea Shepherd, for the whales. It really is quite a moment. And I think that Sea Shepherd has a lot to do with that. Sea Shepherd was down there in the Australian Whale Sanctuary. They've been there for the last 8-9 years, and even starting with one boat and then building the fleet up to 4 boats and a helicopter. And every time they went down there, they asked the Australian government, the Prime Minister, the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Department of Fisheries for Australia to send somebody down there from the Australian government to do what they're doing to stop Japan from whaling in Australia's whale sanctuary. And Australia refused to do that. They just would never do that. They commented on it. They commented that they did not want Japan to be doing this. They didn't want them down there killing their whales, but they would never actually do anything to truly stop it from happening, which they could have done, except for this legal action. But I think because Sea Shepherd was basically continuing to push them, I believe that the Australian government felt like they had to do something in the eyes of their public, because the Australian public is very much behind Sea Shepherd and very much not pleased with this whaling fleet in the Southern Oceans killing these whales. And so what they did is file this action. They spent a fortune bringing the action, over $25 million. But it's worked, at least for now. There is some fear that the Department of Fisheries in Japan will find a way to get around this ruling by somehow creating a scientific program that would comply with the moratorium, allowing us lethal research. Well, allowing for, yes, lethal research for scientific purposes. I don't know how they can do that, though. I think it's going to be really hard for them to do it with the way that ruling is written. But who knows? We'll see. It looks like, though, that they will not whale next year, which is fantastic.
So, major victory there, but they still have a whaling fleet that operates in the Central or North Pacific?
North Pacific.
Okay. And as well as, we got just over 5 minutes left. I want you to also talk about the dolphin slaughter that happens there. Yes.
So whaling will continue. Iceland and Norway continue to whale. Japan will continue to whale. ICR has a separate hunt that it takes place in the North Pacific, much closer to Japan. It's a much smaller hunt, a lot fewer whales. It's done under a separate scientific program, a separate permitting program. It has not been challenged in the International Court of Justice because of this recent ruling. It remains to be seen if some other country might challenge it. That could happen. I don't know. But that hunt occurs in the summertime, and that the fleet will go back out, I believe in June sometime, to carry out that hunt. In Japan itself, in coastal waters, the Japanese fisheries there's no Marine Mammal Protection Act in Japan like there is here. Not only is whale meat eaten in Japan, dolphin meat is also eaten. A lot of it's sold as whale meat, and I don't know if you've seen the Cove. The Cove it's won the Academy Award, I think, 2 years ago. It's a really good documentary. Very much, I've watched it not too long ago, but it's really well done, and it gives you a lot of information on coastal fishing for dolphins and whales in Japan. There's I think it's now the biggest drive hunt in Japan for dolphins. Is a place called Taiji. That's where the Cove is filmed. The actual Cove is a physical place, and it's in the town of Taiji. Sea Shepherd has a campaign there, Endless Patience. There are volunteers called Cove Guardians. I had an opportunity this year to participate as a volunteer and as an activist with the Cove Guardians at Taiji. It was the experience had a lot of impact on me. Taiji is in my opinion, it's a pretty awful place. it's something that I've never experienced before. It's a fishing village. They do these drive hunts to kill these dolphins. The Cove is actually a public swim beach, which is a very the Cove itself is just off a public swim beach, but I mean which is, to think that you could have a public swim area right next to where you do a drive hunt, where you run these marine mammals up on the rocks. The way they kill them, they use spears. They say the fishermen there say that they've developed methods to kill them in a more humane way, but at least in my opinion, that's not the case. It's a very bloody, slow death for these animals. The Taiji, though, also has a marine park there where they have dolphin shows. So just having the two together in the same, and Taiji is a very small place, is just a very surreal experience. They are very active in the captive dolphin industry. They bring trainers in, dolphins that they don't kill for meat. A few of them are selected for the captive industry, which we all know is very controversial. There was a recent documentary on CNN, Blackfish, that really exposed a lot of people to a lot of things that are wrong in the captive marine mammal industry, and the parks around the world, not just SeaWorld, but these parks are exploding all over the world. The drive hunts continue in Taiji. It's within Japanese waters. There is no moratorium. The hope is that they will stop. There's a lot of pressure for them to stop. Carolyn Kennedy this year who's now the new ambassador to Japan, did a tweet condemning Japan for allowing this drive hunt to continue in Taiji. Generated a lot of international press. Sam Simon, a very highly respected Hollywood producer, who was one of the producers and creators, co-created The Simpsons, and is a big activist in the animal rights community in Los Angeles and around the world. Actually went to Taiji this year, and brought a lot of interest and attention to what continues to happen there. So for me, it was the first time I was able to actually participate in a Sea Shepherd campaign, and it was was extremely impressed by the campaign leaders, the volunteers, their dedication, the difficulty of what they were doing. But for me at least, the campaign had a lot of meaning, and hopefully they won't have to go back next year because the Taiji drive hunts will stop.
All right. Well, on that thought, we are pretty much out of time.
Okay.
Talking with Charles Moure. He is a Seattle attorney, represents the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. Is there a website or anything people can follow?
Yes, there's Sea Shepherd. It's seashepherd.org, www.seashepherd.org. All of these campaigns are on the website. It's an extensive website. There's information on being a volunteer, participating in campaigns, and it's an excellent website. Very much encourage people to go look at it. If you're interested in me at all, I have my own website, and it's www.harrismoure.com. It tells you more about me and my firm and the work that we do.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you.